Hi everyone, thanks for joining us for Influencer Roundtable. I'm Regan Cleminson, founder of Coastline Creatives, and we are chatting today with some of the industry's best creators and most prolific marketers, if you think about it. And I'd love to just have you introduce yourself, say your name, your handle or handles, and where you're from.
I'm Colleen. I am from Atlanta, Georgia, and I am Sprinkles of Cocoa on Instagram, and I create drinks.
Lovely.
Hi everybody, I'm Evie, and I run Drinks by Evie on both TikTok and Instagram, and I am based in Brooklyn, New York.
Hi, I'm Brenton. I run Cheers to Happy Hour out of Toronto. Just making drinks, going to bars.
That was the most Canadian intro ever. Please continue on.
What's better than that?
Let's get it started with just a really easy topic. You all create cocktails at varying levels, but you all are kind of tapping into different trends that you enjoy, and you're also consuming a lot of other creators' content and seeing what's trending. What do you think we're going to look forward to in 2023? You're consuming content all the time, you're making content, you're friends with other creators. What are you looking forward to seeing everybody kind of rally around next year?
And so not so much online, but in bars, I find more and more people are mixing with yogurt. And it adds just such a nice little layer. I love it, and I feel like there's going to be more people taking inspiration from those drinks online.
Do you think it's about texture? Is it about flavor? What is it about yogurt that makes you excited to see included?
So texture, definitely, and it has, depending on which one you use, has a little bit of tartness that really shines through. Those two things, for me, is what does it. And there's a little bit of flavor there, and it depends on. Usually, it's just a teaspoon, but maybe you could do a little bit more in there and get more of that flavor. But
Definitely add a little bit of creaminess too.
Yeah.
Because some people have a bit of an aversion to egg whites in cocktails, which you get that. Generally, that's how you get that creaminess in a cocktail. Generally speaking, I feel like people who have an aversion to egg white cocktails might have an aversion to yogurt in cocktails, but I think it might be a little bit more approachable for more people than putting raw egg in a drink.
Yeah, it's funny you should say that, because I find that using egg whites for foam is starting to become antiquated. There's so many better, well, in my opinion, better ways to get that foaminess, the miraculous foamer and stuff like that.
Aquafaba.
Yeah.
And that makes it vegan friendly as well, if you're using some of those alternatives.
Yeah.
Outside of foaminess and yogurt, what else do you guys see coming up next year?
I feel like trends are tricky for me personally because I didn't get into this space to be trendy. I got into this space because I have a passion for the cocktails, and you kind of just have to naturally fall into the trends, which kind of puts me in a rock and a hard place a lot of the times, because sometimes I don't really want to participate in them, but you kind of feel like you have to because you want to keep up with the Joneses of what everybody else is creating. But if I had to pick something that bridges the gap between my passion and a trend, would have to be ice. I feel like people in general, bars in general, content creators, even some of my audience are more interested in experimenting with ice, how to create clear ice at home, how to create floral ice or infused ice or things like that that can really elevate the cocktail. I think it's important. People are starting to realize that ice is a main ingredient.
Yeah, for sure.
Not just a drink accessory. What about you, Colleen?
A trend that I think is going to be very popular in 2023. I think a lot of brands are doing more pre-mixed, bottled, already cocktails. I don't necessarily like a lot of them, but
It can be a trend and you don't have to like it at the same time.
I think that's a huge trend right now.
It can
a lot
be
of,
very
pre-mixed.
hit or miss.
It can be hit or miss, because some things you can't really pre-bottle, like citrus or mint, things like that. But I've seen a lot of brands.
They're definitely rushing the industry right now. The shelves are just covered in them.
Do you think there's anybody who's doing it right now?
Definitely one in particular, because they're doing the classic cocktails like Negroni, old fashioned that doesn't involve fresh ingredients, tip top canned cocktails, their branding is on point. They're tiny and they're strong, and you can't really, it's really hard to replicate real citrus and can it. So I think going with the idea of those strong, classic prohibition style cocktails might be the way to make it taste better.
Yeah.
It's something that, as mixologists and cocktail creators, you might actually consider buying if you were feeling lazy on a
Absolutely.
Tuesday night.
Yeah.
That's for sure. Yeah.
There's actually a couple in Toronto. There's a couple bars that are doing it really, really well. I don't know if you've heard of Bar Chef, but like they're really popular. And they've got like a martini style, like a pre-mixed martini, which is really good. And their smoked old fashioned is really good. I think they have like an old fashioned kind of thing. But also there's a bar called Pinkerton's, and they actually do like the French 75, but they add like sherry to it. And I don't know what exactly they do, but they don't seem to have that problem with citrus. I think they add like citric acid to it, just the right amount. But they're the only, that's the only time that I've actually enjoyed canned cocktails that have the kind of shaken stuff but yeah, like you were saying, like usually if it's a shaken drink and like it has lemon juice in there, it's always really cloying, and I just can't do it.
It kind
Or-
of leaves like a thick taste in your mouth that is not
It's like a coating.
good. Yeah, it's almost like a
Or
coating.
even if it has like mint in it, like a mojito, I find that they taste like toothpaste a lot of
Spearmint.
times.
Yeah.
So
So, as cocktail creators, are you interested in working with ready-to-drink brands who might be doing it right? Or is it something that you're a little bit more apprehensive to consider working with, that category, because of how the industry has presented cocktails thus far within a ready-to-drink format?
Like short answer, yes, but like at a limited capacity for sure.
You have to also consider your audience too. Is your audience also people in the industry, or are they people who are getting into your page because they want to learn more about cocktails and they don't know really how to make cocktails that well? So it could be very dependent on your audience.
I think that's a really good segue into something else that I wanted to chat about today. A lot of your accounts took off during the pandemic, just based on me viewing your content and seeing how your content evolved and grew, and your accounts grew over that time. And oftentimes during that period, you were talking to home bartenders or aspiring home bartenders or people who were just sick of opening up another bottle of wine when they couldn't go outside. Talk to me about, do you think now that we're kind of coming out on the other side of the pandemic, do you think you're still talking to home bartenders, or are you now talking maybe to those same people but educating them on how to be better consumers out in the bartending world, or both?
100% still talking, like having that conversation. Lots of people reach out asking for advice on how to stock up their home bar or like get it started. But in my opinion, I feel like the Gen Z, I think naturally they're just more like interested in like creativity. Whereas like when we were kids, well, not kids, but like
When we were of legal drinking age.
21, we were drinking Four Locos.
yeah.
You know?
Whereas I've seen in a lot of cases like younger people, going that extra distance to get ingredients and like actually create good cocktails or just drinks in general. Like going and actually learning about wines or the spirits that they like, instead of just finding stuff that they can down.
Yep.
I think too, the pandemic just permanently changed everything, not in just in the world, but in our space of creators, especially because we all found success during that time. And I think because people were stuck at home for so long, they found sort of passions that they didn't know were there through our accounts, which is leading to that going the extra mile. Maybe they found us 2 years ago when the pandemic just started and they're learning how to make an old fashioned. And now they're looking at our accounts and they're wanting to learn how to make clarified milk punch, which is it's extensive. It's extensive, but people are interested in it. And I find my audience is, you tend to have those people who are your regulars, so to speak. You work at a bar, you have the regulars that come in. Same thing with your page. I always have regulars that constantly interact, and that certain niche of people totally will go the extra mile.
Yeah. And on the other side of the coin, I also find a lot of like home bartenders with like giving me feedback. And I'm like, all right, let's do it.
Yeah.
Let's get in there.
It sparks your creativity too, right?
Yeah.
Like these are people who are asking you to try something because maybe you have more tools in your toolbox to come up with a solution for the taste that they're trying to achieve, or the texture they're trying to achieve, or whatever it might be. So I think like other home bartenders definitely probably play a role in your creativity to some extent as well.
Yeah.
And I know you, Evie, were a bartender for a period of time. Do you think if you were bartending now that the people who are consuming this content would be better bar patrons?
Totally. Because a lot of people would come in and say, I want a Tito's wet martini. And I'm like, okay, do you know what that means? Not really, that's not what I would say, but I would give that to them. And they'd be like, no, I just want a Tito's. I'm like, well, wet means more vermouth, so that's what I gave you.
But it is wet.
Yeah, it is wet, technically. So I think just having that approachable mindset of, if you're going to a bar and you like to drink your martinis a certain way, these are the words that you have to use. And I think even if as a bartender, if I wasn't where I'm at now and I was still bartending, it would be a really cool resource to bring to the table at the bar.
Yep, definitely.
And talk to the owners of the restaurant or the bar managers and just be like, hey, I learned this really cool thing. Let's try to put it on the menu, things like that.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of approachability, I would say out of the three of you sitting here, Colleen's recipes are the most approachable and speak probably the most to the novice or aspiring home bartender.
Yes, because I actually was not a bartender. I'm actually a chef, so I've never been behind the bar. So for me, it was more, I was the bar patron trying to figure out, like, what do I like? And when I go to a bar, like, how do I tell them what this is? And figuring out what I like and learning how to make it. So the people that follow me, they're also those type of people that are just trying to figure out what they like. And the recipes are more approachable. And then we're kind of learning together.
Yeah.
And finding out what we like when we go out to get a drink.
What's your favorite discovery as of late?
Discovery? My favorite discovery.
Well, I know, so we're all here in a big cocktail house for the week, right? We just talked about fat washing earlier today.
Yeah, I still don't really know. I'm still researching the fat washing.
I think that's a nice marriage of your cooking and learning to become a mixologist at the next level.
Yeah.
I think, too, being a chef, you know flavors. You have that to your advantage. When you're cooking, you need to know what balance is. And it's the same thing with mixology. Mixology might be a little bit more granular on the side of like baking, where it has to be very particular and precise to reach a certain balance. But with cooking, it's a little less precise, and you can kind of be like Bam Margera with it. You know, like bam, a little bit of this. And you can do that a little bit in the cocktail space, but I feel like when you have a background in cooking, you have a really good understanding of depth of flavors and balance and all of that. So I feel like you definitely have that to your advantage, which as you're learning, your palate is still strong and you're, you know, you can rely on it a lot.
And it's developing more.
Yeah.
I'm finding out like the different types of spirits that I like and all of those things that go into a drink.
There's also something to be said for winging it too. Colleen was the one who made the G&Ts that we're all sipping on right now, and they are just strong enough, I would say. But like being able to add an extra splash here and there is kind of the joys of being able to make your own drinks, right?
Yeah.
So not only are you guys cocktail creators and chefs and flavor connoisseurs, but you're also influencers. It's part of the reason why you're here. So I want to switch gears a little bit. And we talked a bit about what we're excited to see next year, but now let's talk about what it means to be a foodie and beverage creator in this day and age. What are some of the things that you wish agencies knew in regards to recipe development when you're working with a brand or doing work on behalf of another company?
Okay, so now I'm gonna go off.
We're ready.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the constant pain is when an ad, like a brand wants to use the channel as a billboard, and it's not. It's so far from that, because as soon as somebody sees it, you're driving down the highway, you see a billboard, you get the ad, you get the message, fine. But as soon as somebody sees part of our content becoming adsy, they shut off. They're like, okay, swipe. And nobody's happy after that. 3 parties are unhappy. Us, the creator, the brand, they're not getting any value, but also the audience is getting less value. And over time, this kind of erodes that loyalty. As soon as we start throwing ads at our audience, they're like, what the hell? And they unfollow, or we just lose credibility. And every time we try to open their mind to something, automatically they're thinking, oh, he's just trying to sell me something. And that, I think that is a really, that's a really hard thing to come back from.
Yeah, I think it's a hurdle kind of striking that balance between wanting to honor the spirit of your platform while also needing to make a living. Most of you have this as a significant revenue stream, if not your only revenue stream, as freelancers and creators. And so we have to be mindful that you got to make money. You got to be able to buy the booze and the glassware and the barware and the groceries and the camera
rent.
equipment.
The rent is
too damn high.
It's everything. It's
The taxes.
It's a lot.
And so, in that vein, we are constantly tiptoeing with our followers and trying to find a way to maybe get them more excited and hyped up that we're getting paid partnerships. And that's something that I see more on TikTok is I think the younger generation is more apt to say get your bag, sis. Do you? We're so excited that you're getting paid work because we really like what you create and we're going to support your paid ads because we want to see all the other stuff that you create too.
And we like you as a creator. It's a level of trust that you've built with your audience. And I think we as creators, we've built trust with our audience, right? But we have not built trust with every single brand. And that's where I think the fall through happens, because a brand looks at our page and they go, ooh, we want to hire her for a deal, whatever. Great, I'll find a dandy. We sign the contract, we look at the guidelines. We're like, okay, we can do this. We can make our personality shine through. And then sometimes the first round of edits come in, red tape. And I really do feel like there's a certain fine line between making it feel super addy and making your personality and the way that your page is. But I also feel that if brands listen to us and let us take the reins a little bit more on things, I think they would perform much better.
I think so.
There's so many guidelines.
Colleen, I think you have a format that speaks really well to brand integrations. There are certain platforms that maybe it's a little bit hard for brands to envision how they fit in. But I think yours does a really good job to be like, oh, we can easily put a bottle in here and have a hero shot very quickly. And that really satisfies, I think, a lot of the cravings of those brands and agencies. Was that intentional, or have you just been kind of lucky that that's how it's worked out?
I think it was unintentionally intentional. Because before I started the cocktail creations, I was doing food photography and I was doing it for a lot of brands. So naturally I would have a lot of their products in the photos and have space for that. So when I navigated to the cocktail photography and videos and recipes, it just naturally made its way into it. So
because you sort of already found your niche. You found your way of shooting this naturally.
So let's talk about recipe development really quickly. because we've now expressed our like overarching concerns with brands and how you work with them, but this is a very significant component of that partnership. What is it that you wish brands and agencies knew about that process? Is it because it takes longer than you imagine? Is it more costly than they probably envision? Walk me through what considerations you hope that they consider in the future.
I wish they would consider that we're not a bar doing it. Like a bar has like several people working on it, and like it's a really good collaboration. But for the most part, like the vast majority of the times, it's just me. And I'll have my wife Sarah like taste test some things. But she's too nice to me. She doesn't want to hurt my feelings. So like I need to like make something, and then I got to sit on it for a while and come back with a bit more objectivity and critique it from that perspective.
Because you want to put out something that if somebody does make this at home, that recipe, you don't, especially if it's an ad, you don't want it to be like a recipe that doesn't live up to the other things that you've created, because then it just lands poorly potentially a second time.
Right.
I would say that a lot of the times they kind of rush everything, so you don't have enough time to even test the recipe as much as you need to and create the recipe and basically do everything to the type of standards that you have. So I think that's something they don't really understand, that it's a time-consuming process and it takes time.
It also might, like for me, I feel like it's part of the reason I want them to hire me for the job. And I think that sometimes they just look at the numbers on our account and they say they have this many followers, they can churn out marketing, copy, recipe development. I mean, we're moving away from traditional commercials, and now us as single influencers, we have every single one of those jobs, production into one, and recipe development is where most of the talent comes in for this. And it's one thing, do they want us to spend our time creating a great recipe, or do they want us to spend our time making a good video? Or do they want both? Most of the time it's both. I just feel like sometimes the respect for the recipe development kind of gets swept under the rug a little bit.
I have my vision as an agency owner of what an ideal format would be. And sometimes this is not the format that we can always adhere to, but it is ideation, come up with a couple of concepts, have approvals and a hierarchy of those concepts from the brands of what they're most interested in, test those concepts, then come back to the brand and say, okay, you like these two ideas the most. I taste tested both of them and built both of those out. This is the one I want to move forward with. This is the ingredient list. This is the recipe. To me, that would be the ideal cadence. But I think that all gets smushed into one conversation versus like the 3 or 4 that it should be.
Especially if they're slow to respond, which we run into a lot, I think. And they're slow to respond, but most of the time I find that they expect us to churn around content very quickly, and it sort of feels one-sided. Working with a lot of brands, I'm sure there are brands that we've really enjoyed working with. So it's not all the time, but I do find that it's often enough that it creates tension too, and it slows down the entire pipeline, and it's difficult to work within those circumstances.
And I feel like a problem that I sometimes have is that like if a client wants three options, usually what I want to do is I want to publish things that I've developed like an emotional connection to. Because if I'm excited about like showing this to the world, that's the kind of thing that I want people to try at home. So if a client wants three recipe options, usually there's one where I'm just like really stoked about it. I'm like, holy shit, like this is a great idea. I'm really into it. Like it's got a story that's playing through my head. Like the flavors just like pop before I even crack a bottle. But then I'll make that, and then I'll make just 2 random whatevers just to appease, like because the client wants 3, and then sure enough they're gonna pick one that I'm like. It tastes good, but like it's not something that is going to have any opportunity at changing the world.
Yeah, you give 3 options and you have one that's like bold, italicized, underline, pick me, pick me, pick me. And then they're like, ooh, this one sounds a little more aligned with the copywriting that we did 6
Oh,
months
yeah.
ago.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh man, that hit me right in the soul.
Trust me, I've been on the receiving end of some of those emails, and it's hard to communicate with your talent that the one that you are the most excited about is just not aligned with the brand messaging or mission statement for whatever that campaign is. I want to go back, Evie, you were talking about red tape earlier. And so we've expressed maybe some of our discontent for working with brands. By the way, there's a lot of great reasons why we like working with brands too.
Totally.
But we're acknowledging some issues here that I think are worth having a conversation about. I think now we got to switch to talking about the platforms. You are talking about a very specific niche category that has a shit ton of regulations around it. And there are platforms that are trying to compensate for those regulations to cover their own ass while being pretty vague with the creators who make them money as platforms. And it's jeopardizing the work that you're doing with brands and the money that you make at the end of the day. Do you think that there is a path forward working with those brands? And if so, what's that next step? What does that look like?
I think the general idea of getting things removed constantly is embarrassing. I know, Regan, we've experienced that a lot with my page a couple of months ago, and I honestly felt embarrassed because of the amount of work that I put in to each ad and the amount of work you put in to speak with the brand on my behalf and the amount of money that brands put into the project. And you want to develop long-term relationships with brands, but because these platforms are putting up so much red tape specifically for alcohol, which is a very tricky subject because there's a lot of people that struggle with addiction and overconsumption, and there's a lot of tiptoeing that we have to do around it in order to make it. I mean, you never want to promote overconsumption regardless, but when you're working with brands specifically, you don't want to overstep in that particular one,
right?
Because you don't want to sabotage the brand's name. You don't want to sabotage your name either. So I don't know what the path is forward because it's still being navigated. Like, look how new TikTok is in general. It just came about a couple of years ago. So I think the people who created TikTok are still learning TikTok.
Well, we need to like start to work away at the stigma around making drinks, because like, you know, somebody working in a government office could very easily look at what we do and say they're promoting alcoholism, but at the same time, like, I just think that's so incorrect. Like, we're not promoting alcoholism, we're promoting respect for alcohol, for the spirits. No, people who are like abusing it, they don't have respect for alcohol. They don't have respect for the process. But like, we are inspiring people to respect these things. And so, you know, we're working away at, you know, back in the day when we used to just fill up a beer funnel and finish it off. Like,
I've never done that. What are you talking about?
Neither have I. But, you know, like, instead of doing that, like when you're in your 20s, like, you know, I think it also shows, like, with the younger generation who are doing less keg stands and doing more Negronis.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
I do think, just to even zoom out a little bit more, it's a heavily regulated industry, but at the same time, it's one of the heaviest taxed industries. And you being a Canadian creator and not even getting access to some of the alcohol and brands and craft that we make here in the US, and if you do get access to it, it's at extreme cost. It's crazy to think that the government is limiting the advertisement in a way that's really thoughtful and honoring that product, because they're making so much money off of it. It seems a little ass backwards.
I also
no?
don't think that they're drawing a line in between the two. It's all falls under the umbrella of alcoholism in their minds. Or maybe they're definitely not looking into it deeply enough to understand that there's separation in doing keg stands, and then there's people like us and people downstairs and people all over social media who have a passion for the craft and want to promote that passion and respect for it.
And Colleen, so for full disclosure to the folks who are watching, I manage Colleen and Evie. And Evie has experienced a lot of content being removed, whereas Colleen has had that happen not very often, if at all. I think
It's
maybe
happened
once or twice. Yeah.
It's happened twice, actually.
And
Once with an advertisement. Yes.
Yep. And so I wonder, like, do you think that Colleen's platform has less of a personal presence to it, and it feels more of like a formulaic style of content versus yours where you might sip something on camera,
Right.
or you're on camera creating it yourself? Do you think that has any impact on content getting removed?
I honestly feel like sometimes it's like a tumbleweed in a way, that once it starts, your account might get flagged a little bit, and then it's boom, boom, boom. Because to be transparent, Colleen, I got like at least 10 to 12 ads removed, all ads, which is really frustrating. Not even my personal editorial content, which
Is the same.
it's the same.
Yeah.
So it's working within the red tape of Instagram and the red tape of the brand's guidelines to create a happy medium so Instagram doesn't look at it and it's like, bye.
And I think we've seen an evolution from an agency like Creative Brief perspective where they're requiring age gating. I know I do now for any projects that I oversee on behalf of a brand. But even so, you can kind of do everything right, but the guidelines that exist on those platforms are still really vague. And if you are perceived to do everything right and it gets removed, the process to rebut and try to prove your point is probably completely flooded, and they're
Non-existent.
inundated. Like, who's actually reading any of those things? At what point, like, then we're kind of like becoming our own legal teams beyond what we already are when we're reading contracts for deals.
Exactly.
At what point, like, is that enough? And do the big agencies that are working on behalf of brands need to go and have conversations with those platforms to advocate on behalf of creators, which are one of their biggest funnels for advertisement?
Yeah.
Do you think we're at an inflection point now?
You know what? Like, I'm glad you said that, because I never even thought about that. Like, up until just a second ago, like, I've always thought that it all rolls downhill onto us. But realistically, like, at some point, the brands are going to start to like say something, hopefully, and that's when it's going to, like, you know, any kind of change is happening. It's going to be that.
If you look at Empress Gin, for example, I think they did a really good job of navigating that, recognizing it that it's happening, and setting their own guidelines via meta messaging, as vague as it is. I think Empress did a really good job just setting those expectations.
Yep.
And also communicating that we know that this is happening. It's, you know, we're not going to look at you different if it happens, but if it does happen, please just try to post within these guidelines.
Right. I do think the onus as of now has relied on influencers to be proactive, or their management teams to be proactive and have those conversations with brands, and more so larger agencies, to say, hey, we want language in our contracts about what happens if posts get removed. We want language in our contracts about exactly the disclosure that we're going to adhere to, so that it's mutually agreed upon, and if it gets taken down, then we acknowledge that it's no fault of our own, and that's something that your agency and the brand itself is going to have to reconcile.
I definitely think that just should be a general rule of thumb, just so
Right?
us as creators and you as a management company can get ahead of it, so that we're protecting ourselves, because the brands aren't protecting us really through that funnel, so, and their language in their contracts. So I think that's honestly really brilliant.
And I think you make a good point, though. There are brands that are doing it correctly and and they're the ones initiating the conversation because they're acknowledging that they're making an investment. And I think I'm finding that more when it's an in-house team at a brand because they have a direct line to the creator and they see that money going from point A to point B. Whereas if they're working through these bigger agencies, it's getting funneled through a much larger machine. And if something gets removed, it's maybe not as quickly communicated back to the brand. Maybe the agency makes up for it in some way, shape, or form. And I don't know. I mean, I'm not advocating for the removal of agencies because I am an agency, right? But I think that there's a way that we can hold a little bit more responsibility in that conversation to make sure that those removals aren't happening and that we are advocating to the platforms on behalf of creators.
Yeah.
What is like out of this whole conversation, because we've talked about a lot of things that we'd like to see change. Let's kind of close the conversation on what's the thing that you're hoping to see change most next year?
Like in the platform, on the platform, or in the like the drinks world.
In any way, shape, or form, anything that you'd really just like to see evolve and change and get better?
Well, I think from my perspective, because like, you know, I live in Canada and our liquor laws are very different. Like our bars literally just got wholesale pricing. Up until like a couple months ago, a bar at the end of the day, like when you take into account everything, was spending more per bottle than a consumer. So the margins were just razor thin. You know, I hate to say that the pandemic, you know, has so many silver linings, but it did lead to our bars getting wholesale pricing, which is helping them out. And I feel like we might be getting a little bit more market, like product options these days. And I really would like that to change. Part of the Quarantine Act that happened because of the pandemic, we're allowed to have bottle shops now, which is a step in the direction of like privatization, which means more enthusiasts can get a hold of stuff that they would like to sit down and have a good glass of and drink like, you know, civilized people, instead of like just having the shelves being flooded with stuff that people don't even want to taste and they'll just shoot. I want that to change.
For those who don't know, when you say bottle shop, do you mean liquor stores? Do you mean?
Actually, it was kind of like a wild, wild west right now. Like I don't even know what to, but like,
I didn't know what it was, so I'm curious.
So during the lockdowns, like bars, any place, I believe it's just any place that has a liquor license, they were now allowed to sell bottles that people can buy and take home. But now like there's like actual bottle shops where like it's not a bar, I guess they had, I think they had to be, it's just it's kind of confusing to be honest. Like there's a couple places that opened up as a bottle shop, but then they installed like a bar just to, like, I think they're doing that to like abide by certain parameters.
Okay.
But it would be nice to have like private stores where people could like buy and sell the stuff they're passionate about.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's cool. I think that's like, we don't even really have something quite at that level here in the US either. But we did have laws being passed where there's to-go alcohol and to-go cocktails and I think different like bottling and liquor laws that changed through the pandemic as well that have stayed. But I can see that that's like taking it to the next step in order to really help out those who are passionate home bartenders. Because I know like you're here visiting in Tennessee, we're all visiting, but he's visiting from Canada. And one of the things that was on your list was like, I want to go and get 2 very specific bottles of liquor that are on the top of my list that I can't get in Canada. And so I think that really speaks to how much of a deficiency that there is in your market. So for your sake, I hope that does evolve.
Yeah.
Colleen, what about you? What do you want to see change?
Mine would be more with like brands working with influencers. I feel like I would like to see them have a little bit more respect for what we do and not treat it like it's just something for social media and to respect it as what it is, and it's advertisement, it's marketing, and it's quality work that takes a lot of work. And a lot of times we're not as big as these agencies that have these art directors and all these things, so we're doing everything ourselves. So we're doing a lot of work, and I feel like they should have a little bit more respect for what we do.
Sure, I think any agency that is in-house taking on a content creation project then realizes you need an art director, you need a prop stylist, you need a model, you need a recipe developer, you need a lighting guy, you need a camera guy, you need an editor, you need a post-production person, you need a sound editor. You are all of those things.
Yeah, marketing department, accounting.
I mean, add another layer to that. I mean, the whole admin component of what it is that you do.
Yeah. And we're HR department as well.
From time to time. And so I think I know for myself and the people who I manage, I definitely try to get that point across in the nicest yet stern way as possible. Yeah, I think it's something that we do have to continue pushing. It sounds redundant on our end because we're saying it all the time, but it has to be said. And part of the reason I even made the decision to start an agency that largely represented creators was because if I work with a bunch of cocktail creators that I know brands are consistently working with, we create our own little union. And all of a sudden it's like the buck stops here. If you want to work with exceptional cocktail creators, you got to pay what they should be paid. And so originally, when it was one cocktail creator here, one cocktail creator there, a lot of these individual agencies are like, ooh, how do we price this particular niche? And so I think as agencies, talent management agencies continue to evolve and niche down, they're going to get that corner of the market and be able to maybe control the scales, tip the scales, I guess you can say, with some of those bigger brands and agencies. That's my hope. That's my change, and I think we're really aligned on that.
Yeah, so true. And like having the government like actually recognize it as an industry. Like right now, they look at us just as like, I think there's been a stigma like right from the start when it comes to social media, like influencers. Everybody just loves to hate them, and I feel like slowly but surely, like when it comes to categories like ours, where it's not just like people who like getting free shit, it's more like people who like to explore actual passion. And I feel like that people are going to start noticing that, and eventually we're going to get to a place.
Fingers
Sort
crossed.
of like a separation.
Yeah.
Evie, on to you.
Well, you know what I'm going to say. I really hope that there's a change with the transparency of guidelines within the platforms. I think I've personally just experienced a lot of
Trials and tribulations.
With it, and the fact that it's so vague is really frustrating, especially, I mean, both TikTok and Instagram, but as soon as you submit something for a review, first of all, they don't even tell you why it was taken down. They just said it violates guidelines. And I look at my video and I have to kind of nitpick every single thing. Why did it violate guidelines? And you try to submit it for an appeal or submit it for a review, and then it kind of just goes poof off into the
cloud.
Yeah, the cloud.
It's the best.
I call it like the purgatory of social media, and you can't access it again. You can't, there's no way to check the status of anything. There's no way to see where that goes, and you're just kind of left feeling a bit heartbroken because you want to put this content out there, whether it's an ad or not, but specifically with ads, you want everybody to be respected. Everybody's job needs to be respected in that way. And I think if we had clearer guidelines or even language that protects ourselves against those guidelines in the very beginning, I think would be really helpful.
I agree. Well, I think this video will land in the laps of some of the right people to maybe make those adjustments and changes. That's
Or
the
just
hope.
blacklist us.
Yeah.
One or the other. But I really want to thank you for coming and just giving of your education and your time and your thoughts. I'm so grateful. I know a lot of people are going to get a lot of value out of this conversation. So cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Regan.
And thanks for listening.